Hello and welcome to Fantasy View, a podcast about reviews for fantasy novels. I'm Jason Hubbard. Around this time last year, I got my Kindle Fire, my first, and so far only, tablet computer. And I hugged it and kissed it and did several unmentionable things to it. Maybe I'll write a blog about it someday. As I was poking around the online bookstore, I saw an ebook with a rather unusual cover illustration. It depicts a red-haired woman wearing what looks like a chainmail outfit plus a decorative steel helmet. Just behind her is what appears to be a Like, which is an undead being with necromantic powers, and is said to be impossible to kill. Although, I like to see what would happen if you dropped a safe on his head. So, it's a cool looking cover, but my description so far doesn't make it unusual. No, what makes it unusual is the helmet the woman's wearing, for it's so large it completely covers her forehead and eyes. Hell, it even covers her nose. So imagine this scene in which this woman is confronting this magical undead creature while wearing this helmet. She'll be like, "Where are you? Where are you, you evil abomination? Seriously, where are you? I can't see a damn thing with this on." If you could just, say something, that would help a lot, okay? Aha! There you are! Ow! Oh, I was so sure it was you. Actually, I didn't see the illustration in this manner. My first thought was maybe this woman was like the title character in The Man with the Iron Mask. Maybe she has to wear this thing as a punishment, blind and helpless while stuck in a dark, damp cell. And then a Like comes to her and pretty much ruins her day. In other words, there was a story behind this illustration. I wanted to find out what it was. Well, I didn't do it right away. I sat on this book until recently when I saw it in my Kindle's memory, and I was like, oh yeah, I got that some time ago. Come on, all you Kindle users. You know you do the same. You get a bunch of titles and end up forgetting some of them. Anyway, the title of this book is Lady of the Helm, written by T.O. Monroe. I like to think that the initials stand for That Other Monroe, like the author is trying to distinguish himself from some other guy named Monroe. If you happen to be this Monroe, or you know this person, please say so in the comment box below. Just don't expect me to care. So here's the setting. There's a kingdom called the Kingdom of the Salved. Hell of a name. In fact, the citizens like the word salved so much, they have places called Undersalve and Udersalve. In this kingdom, magic is strictly forbidden, except for the priesthood and the elves for some reason. Anyone else caught using magic is exiled from the kingdom beyond the strong defensible walls on the border. So what's a bunch of high-profile exiles to do except resurrect a powerful undead creature from his magical prison so he can build up an invasion force and help you conquer the kingdom you were exiled from? Like you do. One of these high-profile exiles is a prince named Xander, who of course believes he is the true heir to the Kingdom of the Salved. There's also a wizard named Hasselrig, and a woman named Dima, who is actually a Medusa whose gaze can turn people to stone if she reveals her eyes and scalp full of serpents. Together with their new master, Maelgrum, and a host of orcs, they get past a strongly secured fortress with subtlety and elbow grease, and proceed to advance further into the kingdom. The woman on the cover illustration is named Niarmit. Now, I'm sorry if I sound ignorant, because for all I know, Niarmit is a real name somewhere. But that sounds more like a name for a dragon, not a butt-kicking rogue who is also a priestess and a princess. At least Niarmit is said to be a princess, so why she's lurking around the exile lands, killing orcs for sport and money, instead of frolicking around a palace in fancy dresses, I don't know. The book doesn't say, although maybe one of the two sequels will reveal this. As it turns out, Niarmit's heritage is not what she thought it was. The elven king, Faeril, reveals that she is of the royal bloodline of the Kingdom of the Salved. Thus, several magical artifacts that respond to those of the bloodline will work for her, including the Helm, which is said to guarantee victory against the evil Maelgrum and his forces if Niarmit herself wears it. That's pretty much all you need to know for a start. Just be aware that this story has several layers involving numerous characters. The book keeps switching back and forth between main characters, keeping the reader up to date on them, often on a tight schedule. It's kind of like the Song in Ice and Fire books, although the switching around is much more frequent. I have to say, I'm of two minds about the book's exposition. Exposition is important in many fantasy novels, of course, especially those that take place in a world entirely of the author's making. Readers of thriller and drama books have it easy. If they see that a story takes place in San Francisco, for example, they can just say, "Oh yeah, that's the place Captain Kirk went to in order to rescue some humpback whales." It's also the setting of that gloriously bad movie, The Room. But readers of fantasy have it a little tougher. They have to figure out the rules and stipulations of the new world they're going to read about, like how magic works, if there is any, and what different races of people there are. It can be tough, but fun. The beginning chapters of Lady of the Helm made me a little confused at first. I like to think I can pick up on things pretty quickly, but even so, I had some difficulty figuring out what characters are important and what are not, and why one place is different than another. Hell, I didn't know until quite a while that over a decade had passed between the prologue and the first chapter. The author doesn't feel the need to spell everything out all at once, which can be good unless it's confusing enough to make the reader rage quit. It doesn't just happen in video games, people. Exposition in fantasy stories can be tricky. I can't emphasize this enough. While I believe that exposition is easier to do in books than movies and TV shows, authors are warned about doing exposition dumps, which are usually very long sections that read like textbooks. For example, Christopher Columbus sailed across the Atlantic Ocean in the year 1492. He landed in the Bahamas, did some stuff, then sailed back to Spain, and then back to the New World 3 more times. This is just my opinion, but I believe that exposition dumps are sometimes necessary. But if you gotta do them, at least make them entertaining, not like a boring, dry textbook. Throw some humor in there, or use colorful language. Anything to make your exposition captivating rather than a chore to read. I once had a critic of my work say that exposition should only, let me say that again, only be done in dialogue. Characters should explain stuff to each other, instead of the narrator explaining directly to the reader. Indeed, exposition through dialogue can be a good idea, but only if it's handled correctly and not all the time. The problem with exposition through dialogue is that you run the risk of having characters sounding self-aware, like they know that they're in a story, and that the audience/readers need to know some information in order to figure out what the hell's going on. Hey everybody, I'm doing a podcast about reviews of fantasy novels that you'll be listening to on YouTube, unless I choose some other kind of host site, in a perhaps ill-advised attempt to make people become aware of my own work. Just thought I'd say that in case I happen to be a fictional character in a book or movie, and my viewers/readers need to know why the hell I'm all by myself talking into a gigantic microphone that's hooked up to my computer. Hell, you never know. Don't judge me. So yeah, characters who sound very self-aware, explaining stuff to others who should already know this information, can smash a reader's suspension of disbelief and take them out of the story, which isn't fun. Does Lady of the Helm do this? Fortunately, no. It manages to avoid this pitfall. Still, the subject of exposition gave me a chance to lecture at you, which is fun. What Lady of the Helm does is spread the exposition throughout the story. We learn that magic is forbidden and that it can get people exiled, sometime after we learn that there is one too many men returning to a fortress from the land of exiles and orcs. We learn that one character, Quintala, is a half-elf, sometime after we learn that she has naturally long life and looks much younger than her actual age in human standards. After a little while, I did get to understand what was going on and who all the main characters were. Still, some characters simply appear right out of the blue, like King Gregor, who was awakened by a shining jewel. He was never mentioned before, and I had to use my experience from reading fantasy books to know why the jewel was shining. There's also a man who suddenly shows up to confront Niarmit while she's skinny dipping. You know that such a character in such a situation is either a peeping Tom, or someone who's there to kill Niarmit. It turns out he is the latter, an assassin who's also a former flame. He shows up, he and she have a standoff, and then he gets killed. He is basically only there to die and give Niarmit some grief. Oh, the poor bastard, we hardly knew ya. The quality of the writing is a give and take. The narrative is well paced for the most part, And the author uses some real-world words that I never knew of before. I could just tap on these words on my Kindle, and voila, the definition pops up. For example, a bailey is the name for the outermost defensive wall of a castle or fortress. And here I thought it was just the name of a creamy alcoholic drink. Unfortunately, this book should have spent more time in the editing process, especially when it comes to punctuation. There are some run-on sentences and missing commas around quotation marks, and a few words that should have been capitalized. These mistakes are not grossly throughout, but they are apparent and show up often enough to be distracting. My recommendation? Well, if you like epic high fantasy stories about war and greed and reluctant heroism, you can't go wrong with Lady of the Helm. It's the first part of a trilogy, and it's about 350 pages, so it's a brisk read and not exhausting. It's sufficiently graphic without going overboard, so Munro believes that if you're going to be writing about war, you shouldn't hold back, at least by much. And his orcs are rather gross and barbaric. For example, the orcs that take over a sacred place are said to have been shitting in it. In the book, he uses that very word, shit. The author says he thought about the story for many years before finally writing it out. And it was only after writing 100,000 words when he realized the story was going to have to be a trilogy. I can respect him for that, taking so much time to carefully work out all the plot details. Even though he does rely on one or two unbelievable coincidences to build character relationships. At some point, I began to think the story seemed familiar. It's not that it's a blatant ripoff of something else. It's just that the reluctant hero who turns out to be royalty storyline has pretty much been done to death already. I swear, ever since Darth Vader revealed himself to be the hero's daddy, so many storytellers have been trying to blow people away with similar reveals. Come on, people, not every hero needs to be an extra special snowflake. So that's Lady of the Helm by T.O. Munro. Not to be confused with the very well-fished college football player. I'm Jason Hubbard. Thanks for listening to Fantasy View, and please, keep reading.